We're here to talk through this cave Minesweeper variation by Jin Huan. It's actually a really elegant blending of these two rule sets. I didn't, when I first saw this puzzle, think that would be the case, but at least the particular clues used in this grid give a fairly clean solution path with some tricky logic along the way. One of the first things to recognize, like the Minesweeper rules are really saying there's not much cave around a big number. And for instance, with this 7 is going to have only one cell around it. The remaining will be shaded. There are 8 cells around it that can be an escape path. So I can see like the 7 can come out straight to the top and straight to the right and straight to the bottom. But if I take a cell like this one to the left and then actually mark all around it what would be the outside of cave cells, it's isolated. That's no good. It's also a rule that you can see quickly is that because you want to, in a cave, tend to avoid these checkerboard patterns because they'll be isolating either the cave or the outside cells, that the corner cells around the 7 are instant no-goes. And so start of this puzzle, I would mark that these cells in the corners are no-goes, this edge cell is a no-go. And let's actually take another color here. Around the 7, either the top cell, the right cell, or the bottom cell is how the cave stays connected. So only one of these cells in red around this clue will be shaded. Similarly, like around this 7, exactly one of those clues in red, one of the cells in red will be shaded, and the corner cells for sure are outside of the cave, and we could be connecting like this as an example, other things that can be through that, but keep this in mind. And besides what the big 7s do, there are actually 4 other spots, these 4s on edges, that work the same way, that a 4 on an edge has, at the start, something like 3 cells that are in red. That would be how it gets out of the grid, but once we actually are somewhat shaded like we have now, it really has, in this case, the lower right, only one cell that gets it together to other things, and that's going to be this one that connects over to the right. Let's do it again for this 4. This 4 could connect to the left, to the top, or to the right, but for sure it's going to be not using those cells. This can connect to the left or to the bottom. In this case, the top cell, which is in the upper right corner, wouldn't give enough room for the rest of the cave to come together. And for this 4, similarly to the left or to the bottom or to the right, are the cells which will keep it connected. These corner cells are no good, and given that these 4 and 2 come together, this is one of the few spaces, there are a couple spaces, but one of the few spaces where the Minesweeper clues work together, that there are 2 cells together seen in these 3 spaces, and that means that the remaining ones around the 4 just above, the 2 has seen all of its clues. Around the 3 is another case where there's 1 more cell shaded to the left, but this 2 in the upper right needs to have 2 cells shaded, so this remaining cell that's not seen by the 3 must be shaded. And for connection, we get something like this. So that's pretty quick progress up there. I think connectivity and some of the stuff I was marking in red is a great way to think about it, is going to be key in this puzzle. And so let's take a clue like this 6 and say, how does it get connected to the rest of the cave? And how I was using this red color so far in the grid is to say, like, if the 6 came over to the right, it doesn't have any way to keep coming down, that this remaining cell would be marked off as a shaded cell in doing that. And so this one that's in 6 has to stay connected to the cave through one of these 2 cells in yellow for sure. Absolutely must use one of these cells in row 3. And that's a deduction that is pretty elegantly placed by Jin Hu at this stage of the puzzle to be used. And it's using right around this 5 just nearby it, that the 4 other cells that aren't the ones in yellow must be part of the shaded group. And after we mark those in, we see that for the 6 to actually be connected, it's got to be this cell to the left and not this one to the right that's part of the cave. The cave keeps connecting. We've got these 6 coming in. We now isolate on the right side of the 4 to just have one channel out, and it's going to keep coming out. Notice that as it gets to this cell, if it came over and joined to the 7, it doesn't have a way to keep coming down. So actually, for sure, we can keep coloring it down in this direction. And there's a very subtle deduction. We'll probably need this later on, but I'll do it now, which is for the whole left of this cave to work through and connect to the whole right of the cave, we have to use this channel right here. And why is that? If we don't use this channel, we're going to be effectively coming through one of these groups that's marked off in red. And we know for sure we can't bridge across 2 red cells around either this 4 clue or the 7 clue. So for instance, the 4 here, if we came here, it couldn't keep coming in either of those directions. That's just not possible. The 4 here, if you came in like down here, you can't come over further to the right. And so this connection is key, and particularly that this cell is part of the cave is something that's going to actually play out and probably constrain this 5 clue once we get a little more information over here to the left. So let's do some of the work we can do in the middle of the grid to make sure we understand how we close this out. And we're going to start by, again, using a typical type of cave deduction, which is that we have an avoidance of a checkerboard pattern where we have 2 cave cells and a reverse corner of a 2x2 shape that's outside of the cave. This cell here cannot also be outside of the cave. If this were true, you would have a connection issue for the cave, or one of these outside cells would not be joining up. When you have 3 parts of a 2x2 cell shaded like this, you always avoid the root that would be making a checkerboard pattern, or sometimes called a Bottenberg pattern. That means that around this 2, one of these cells on the left is going to be the last one shaded as part of the cave. Notice that this top one would not have a way to get out, so the bottom one is the one that's shaded. That actually finishes all the cells around this 2 clue, which finishes the 7 clue, which finishes the 4 clue. And this remaining clue on the left side actually just has 2 cells left that can get shaded, so we'll mark those in. If we hadn't already marked this cell around the 5, we would now, but we've got 6 cell options, and we've got to get through to the right side of the grid. And once we mark this in, the remaining cells around the 5 are part of the outside of the cave. That finishes as 4, which forces a shading around the 7. That finishes this 2 as well. We've got this 4 clue, and the 4 clue has 3 cells remaining to shade, and we want to be avoiding situations where we leave a corner like this or a corner like this. So the very first thing I see about this clue is if I'm taking one more cell as part of the cave, it's going to have to be one of the orthogonally adjacent cells, not one of the cells that have diagonal adjacency. And so this is the shape we get for this part here. The 2 in the lower right has to connect in with the rest. So it leaves just one shaded cell, and we'll see that actually fulfills the rest of the puzzle and finishes this variation. So a pretty elegant solve for a constrained cave puzzle. I hope you enjoyed seeing the way the 2 rules work together, particularly the connectivity around some of these clues like the center 7s as well as the edge 4s that have only a single cell to take that can still be part of the cave connections. So if that was helpful for understanding the solve and you don't want to see the Easter eggs associated with this puzzle, this is a good time to stop the video. Otherwise, there'll be some spoilers ahead for this puzzle and for others in the week as we talk through some of the secrets that Jinhu was hiding throughout the whole debut week. And we'll start by clearing the grid. And as we clear the grid, let's just imagine we're sort of not good at reading rules and we just stop reading rules. And instead of their usual meaning, we don't even look at the fact that there are rules for this puzzle and say, oh, it's a cave. And let's try solving it like it's a cave puzzle. And it looks to be credible as a cave puzzle, but probably a little tricky as a cave puzzle, but it's got some great seeds to it. So we'll start with some of those seeds. The center clues, this 2 and this 4, are kitty corner. And because we avoid a checkerboard pattern like this in every cave puzzle, we know for sure that one of these 2 cells is going to be the last cell of the 2. And we've got this kind of pattern there. And I'm going to turn on, if I haven't already, it looks like I have it on, line helper. And one thing I do when I mark up cave puzzles is mark cells, cell edges with an X when I know one or both of those cells are going to be shaded. So the one thing that this indicates is the cave does not continue through the space. And you can see why it doesn't continue through the space. If both of these were part of the cave, this 2 is far too large and not going to be there. So this is an option, this is an option, or both of those shaded is actually an option. But the one thing that's not true is the cave can't go all the way through. And so we can mark these edges off, which will help us a little bit later in the puzzle to see some connections. We can actually mark at the start of the grid any space that's 2 away from a 2. One of these edges will always be shaded, or both. Similarly around this 2 clue, to the bottom, to the right, to the top. On this clue, to the bottom and to the right. On this 2 clue, to the left and to the right. And for sure, actually, this is not used anywhere. And on this clue over here, to the top and to the right, and for this 2 to the left, bottom, and top. These are all edges that are functioning in the grid. And one of the things that it will show you is a case where for connectivity, for instance, this lower right 2 has to take this cell 1 away into the grid to the left and to the top. And that's because if it took this cell and this were shaded, it's got to quickly bend up because of how the X's go. If it took this cell, it similarly has to bend to the left. And so just as we're tracing out what can stay connected, we can mark that this cell is part of the cave, as well as a cell right to the next left of it. These similarly connect like this. You'll actually see this cave can't actually come down and escape. Look how we've got two X's marked. If this came down, it would quickly put those in, and that actually quickly isolates the rest of the grid. So one thing that these X's do helps us see where we've got an isolation point. Actually, this is an isolation point, and this is an isolation point, which will help us come through some part of the solve. This 4, just looking visually, we've got an X that's 2 cells to the left, so we could take 3, but have to take this 4th. This 6 has as many as 4 it can take in this row. It will take a 5th and take a 6th, which is up here. We want to really understand this space. Does the 6 connect to the 7? And let me see what we can think about here. Here's a case where we now have found a place where we can put in a new edge. And that's because this 4 clue, now that we've marked this cell over here as part of the cave, it's seeing 2 cells. It could see a 3rd and a 4th, but not a 5th. And so for sure, one of these is an edge. That's going to be where the cave gets shaded. And that means that the 7, which can see as many as 4 in this row, like these 4, can see a 5th and a 6th, but then a 7th. And so this 7 has to connect to the top. And that's going to mark this as outside of the cave. It's going to mark an edge here. Don't have too much more right now for that, but this is a really strong start. This 4 now doesn't come to the left, so it's only vertical. And this outside of the cave cell has to get to an edge, so we can put that in the grid. And this is a pretty good seed for how we're going to solve the rest of the puzzle. And I think there is one tricky final observation, which will be what drives the last part of the solve. And I'm just trying to see how to set this up right. And one of the things to watch for is any space in a grid you have a kind of alternating pattern. Like here, look where we have a cave cell, a not cave cell, and then a cave cell again. We talked about how you would have checkerboard issues in different spaces. So take some of these cells in red and recognize what happens if one of these is part of the cave. If it's part of the cave, because of the checkerboard options next door, where we really have an alternating pattern straight away, this being on forces immediately these others to be on. It's almost like a Three Musketeers here, that this is a cell where if this is in one form, all of these are in the same form, and that's when it's part of the cave. And this can appear in different ways in different places, but the reason this looks to be a key constraint is actually when we come down to this spot below. And that's because this being on forces both of these to be on. And once you actually think about this a little bit, this cell now is going to have to be shaded, and that means there's another checkerboard that arrives just here, but this will be unshaded. And so there's a stretch of 5 cells in a row that would be part of the cave if it started by shading this, what I'll call Three Musketeers-like cell. It's not a real term, I just made it up today. But where this cell has connections right around it, if this cell is part of the cave, it forces quickly these to be part of the cave, and a consequence, if you actually mark that in, is you get a 5th cell part of the cave, which is problematic. So this cell for sure is shaded. This now is an interesting pattern. If you've not seen how my notes work, this is a good time to think through the shading on shading form. Recognizing that an X is going to force a shaded cell around it, this is now a really key cell to think about, as well as this cell. And that's because if it gets shaded, because of how the X works, it immediately forces a checkerboard shape, because we'll have to shade the cell just below it, and these 2 cells are quickly dead. And so given how I've marked these X's, when an X is sharing 2 cells with an on-off pattern, the one thing you will know for sure is that the side that is already on the shaded side will stay shaded on both sides of it, and that's to avoid the checkerboard shape. And so this is a quick way we can fill in this grid. We can then get this, which is going to hit an X and put in shading. We avoid a checkerboard, this puts in X, which puts in shading. This 5 is now a finished clue, so this 5 is a finished clue. The 6 looks to be 6 vertical, so the 7 is going to have 1 horizontal. This is how that comes out to stay connected. We need to avoid a checkerboard, so this is how this goes. This still doesn't see 6 cells, so it needs to take one more here. This 4 is finished, so we'll mark that in. and to avoid a checkerboard, this gets shaded. This 2 has to come over, avoid a checkerboard. This 2 comes over. This 2 is finished. So I've got these marked in. Notice at the top, the 4 can stay connected by taking these 2 cells or staying those cells, but it can't bridge all of the space. So for sure, you've got to come down this vertical channel to have the grid work out. And marking in that vertical channel connectivity, this cell right between the 7 and 4 gets shaded. These remaining ones get to be marked as part of the cave. So this now it can't connect the 3 to the 4 because that would take too many cells. So this comes up like this. We're going to need to have general connectivity also through this side. So let's see how we're going to make this work. And it's going to start by recognizing we finished this 7. It sees 7 cells, so this 2 comes in, shaded, shaded, no checkerboard, 4 over. This 4 has to come down or we're not going to be able to see enough, and this cave cell has to escape. So we mark those in. This 4 can't connect to the left, so for the cave to connect, it's got to do this. The cave can't come all the way straight to the right, it must take at least 1 cell down. This 4 now has to do this to stay connected. We've got this. Mark this in, last shaded cell, and this puzzle wasn't set to accept both answers, but this is the standard cave answer, a very hard standard cave puzzle, but using a lot of great clues, including these corner 2s, including this stretch of cells here that we used a pretty creative approach to know were all shaded in, which was a whole way that checkerboard patterns were going to force a whole set of them to clear together, which wasn't going to work out. So really challenging cave puzzle on top of a challenging cave minesweeper puzzle. That they both worked together is one of the incredible things about this puzzle in the midst of Jinhu's week. Hope you appreciate the elegance of the puzzle and learn a little bit about how to solve cave through this example, and we'll see you again soon.